Live on WFLA Now. With a specialized degree in climate, Chief Meteorologist and Climate Specialist Jeff Berardelli is pioneering the way we look at climate and extreme weather. Welcome to Jeff's Climate Classroom, powered by ArmorView Window and Door.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me this week. This week is a very important topic, something that has been really bothering scientists all over the world, and especially here in the state of Florida, is the massive marine heat wave in Florida this year and what it has done to coral. It has been a mass bleaching event and a mass mortality event. And the person that I'm about to bring up and introduce you to says and described this as demoralizing to some scientists and also as a gut punch because this has been such a widespread, extensive, and relentless event for the Keys coral, but not just in the Keys, in other parts of South Florida as well, that it has been devastating to the coral community there. But there are some glimmers of hope as well. So with all that said, I want to bring up Liv Williamson. Now, she is a coral restoration scientist at the University of Miami Rosenstiel School, where I used to teach. I was just telling Liv that many, many years ago, of course. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
So this was, we'll just jump right in. This was catastrophic. I know that we were expecting things to get progressively worse, and I know that there were going to be years that were worse than others, and that some years would be really, really bad. But did you ever expect it to be anything like it? Did you ever think you'd see this anytime soon, at least?
I really didn't. You know, it's one thing to kind of know in theory, based on the science, based on the projections, that we were sort of inevitably going to experience some sort of mass bleaching event. But to see corals right before my eyes that I've worked on for years, not only bleach, but actually die en masse in the course of just a few weeks back in July and August, was totally shocking and continues to be just an absolute tragedy for our coral reefs here in Florida.
Now, I wanted to ask you another question. You know, we might as well cut to the chase. We know that this has been a horrible year. We know that we saw corals bleaching very quickly and then just almost going straight from being healthy to dying in days, some at least. So we know just how intense the heat was. Water temperatures up to 92, 93 on some of the reefs, and not just at the surface, all the way down to the bottom. So I think the big question on everyone's mind is the season is wrapping up. And what I mean by that is the heat season is wrapping up. Do we have an idea of how the coral did? How much loss are we dealing with here? And how much are we able to save?
Sure. It's unfortunately really hard to estimate just sort of population-wide what we've actually lost. You know, most different groups have eyes on certain reefs, but we really can't get a whole picture of the, you know, hundreds of miles of Florida's coral reef that spans all the way from Port St. Lucie down to the Dry Tortugas. But, you know, based on the reefs that I was monitoring down in the Upper Keys, so the Key Largo area, things like staghorn and elkhorn, the elkhorn that's on the screen right now, you know, we've experienced probably, you know, up to 90% or more loss of those species throughout the Keys. You know, fortunately, things get better the further north you get. There was less heat up in sort of Miami and Broward, so things look better for those corals, and different species kind of responded differently. So many brain and star corals that are also really important for forming our reefs, while they did bleach, they do look like they're recovering already and will probably survive and continue to be there for us. So it's just a really mixed bag. We're very sad and concerned about the staghorn and elkhorn in particular, but lots of other corals do look like they are going to make it and be just fine.
You know, we're streaming live on Facebook, and I'm seeing some comments pop up, and as you would imagine, most of the comments are denial of climate change and denial of the fact that this is even happening in the first place. In fact, I'll read a couple of those comments, just kind of call those people out. Barbara says these people have a screw loose. Let me see what else we have here. Raymond, Michael says, yeah, there's so many that you could actually go on our website and see this. Tracy says this is not the hottest summer ever, so there's zero climate change, and the list goes on and on. We expect this on Facebook because we see this pretty often there. But let's be honest here. Be honest with people. How bad was this heat wave compared to other years that you have seen? And how bad was this bleaching event compared to other bleaching events? You know, just because, you know, we're seeing the comments here on Facebook.
this heat completely shattered records. Not only did it break them, but it shattered them. I mean, we're seeing temperatures sustained from, June, July, August, September that are 5-6 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 degrees Celsius above the normal, which is just an absurd range. We have these graphs that kind of show the temperatures every year, and sort of here's where it's been for a while, and literally twice as much heat stress accumulated this year here in Florida on our coral reefs. So there's just absolutely no denying the science.
It's right there on the screen, by the way, where you see the purple. That's 20 plus weeks of heat stress. So every week where the coral could possibly be, and you of course know this, but I'm telling the folks at home, every week where there could potentially be heat stress on the coral kind of adds up over time. It gets worse and worse for the coral. So 20 weeks, the old record was about 10. We ended up with 22 weeks in some areas, right?
Yeah, it totally depends on where along the reef tract. But the point is, everywhere along the reef tract, this was about twice as much heat stress as we've ever seen in the amount of time that we've been recording this. And there's just no world in which this would have happened without human-caused global climate change. Although it's an El Nino year, which is a natural fluctuation that happens every 5 to 7 years and has been happening for a very, very long time. And these bleaching events are only happening now as these climate change impacts start to really add up in our oceans.
I think it's worth telling people that it wasn't like Florida Keys coral reefs were healthy going into this, right?
Right.
I mean, we had lost since the 1970s, I think coral cover was somewhere in the 30 to 40% range. And now coral cover is in the 3% range or something like that. Is that right? And that's not including this year. That was before we started this summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as a result of that, I mean, scientists and restoration groups here in Florida have been very, very active and actually very successful in building coral restoration programs to try to replace a lot of the corals that have been lost from our reefs over the last few decades because of all those impacts, disease, previous heat events, and also sort of nutrient runoff, overfishing, just ecosystem impacts that are really, really heavy here in South Florida. And our restoration groups have been incredibly successful at that. We've planted thousands and thousands of corals, especially these elkhorn and staghorn, all along the Florida reef tract. In fact, if you've been snorkeling and you've seen an elkhorn or staghorn coral, it's more likely than not that that was planted there by somebody, and that they've been doing really, really well up until this summer. And part of what was so demoralizing, that word that I'm using, is that these corals that we've planted that have done really well and been successful in the face of all of these other threats, this summer was too much for them. It proved to be just, a step too far, and sort of the last needle in the haystack to really cause even our restored corals, even our corals that we've hand planted on these reefs, to die in many cases.
So you described it as a gut punch, demoralizing. Basically, painstakingly, you and your colleagues, and there are hundreds, if not thousands of you from different organizations around Florida who are down there trying every day to grow these coral in labs, put them back out in the wild to try to restore populations. These reefs have been decimated not only by warm water, but also by disease, nitrogen, nutrient pollution. So it had to be so difficult to watch years and years worth of work evaporate in a matter of weeks. And you knew this was going to happen. I say you knew this was going to happen because the freight train of climate change, which is moving gradually but getting worse, is predictably going to, unfortunately, eliminate most tropical corals unless you do something really drastic. You used the word drastic in the email exchange between me and you. What kind of drastic? It's clear that what we're doing is not working in some cases with staghorn and elkhorn because most of them did not survive this summer after years and years of work by the scientists. So what is the next step for restoration of coral?
Fortunately, we've been working on all kinds of other intervention strategies, both my colleagues here in Florida and really folks around the world that work on these issues, that sort of span a range of riskiness and sort of different levels of intervention. Everything from trying to breed these corals to be more heat tolerant, actually taking parents that survive heat waves and breeding those together to create new generations of corals that are more heat tolerant, to things like manipulating the types of microbes that live in these corals. They have lots and lots of different microbes that are really essential for their survival, and certain ones are actually more heat tolerant than others. So if we're able to deliver a more heat tolerant type of microbe to a coral before a bleaching event, they actually might avoid bleaching. The issue with all of these interventions is scaling them up. We're able to achieve these things in the laboratory and put some of those out onto the reef and into the field. But these are whole reefs. This is hundreds of miles of Florida's coral reef that we're talking about that's been impacted by this event. So really, to me, the big challenge is scaling up some of these intervention strategies that we know are promising, but that we individual scientists just can't do on a massive scale. And that requires investment, from the government, from, larger funding bodies, private investment even, that, just science doesn't typically get. And I think that will need to come if we have a hope of trying to implement these intervention strategies on a larger scale.
So we need to intervene genetically and change the genes of some of these corals so that they can survive a hotter planet. And also you mentioned in the email to me that Florida's coral may not be able to be diverse enough. So we may have to bring in coral from other places that might also be heat tolerant to build up our reefs once again. Because if you build up a reef with only one or two types of coral, it's not really a resilient reef, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, resilience comes from diversity in all kinds of, places in nature, and that's certainly true on a coral reef. And I mean, diversity as far as species. So we want elkhorn corals, we want staghorn corals, we want brain corals, all these different corals that make up our reef ecosystem and keep it healthy. But we also want within any of those populations to have lots of different individuals that are breeding together and keeping a really robust population. And the challenge with what we saw this summer, where we've lost at this point the vast majority of our elkhorn corals, for instance, there's just not enough individuals left there to breed together on the reef and create a viable population. So we have to intervene to help them do that.
I don't think people understand how impactful this is, not just to the ecosystem, but to the economy of people who rely on this in the Florida Keys. So many people go to the Florida Keys so they can dive, kayak, fish. If you destroy the foundation of the Florida Keys, which truly is its reef tract, which is what makes it unique in the United States and in the world. This is the third largest reef tract in the world. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Well, this is billions of dollars in economic damage. Shooting ourselves in the foot is an easy way to describe it. And it has real world impacts on actual people, not just on the animals and the plants that live on the coral reefs. People will end up losing their business if these coral cannot recover. And it's not just the people who run the dive operations. It's the people who own the hotels, who, who have the restaurants there. Why would people go there if the reefs are all dead?
Right. I'm really, really happy that you highlighted all of those connections, because it's absolutely not just about the corals and the ocean, although, of course, I think that's beautiful. But our coral reefs really do underpin the entire economy of South Florida. People come here. It's a tourism destination. People come here to fish and to snorkel and to dive on our reefs. And if they don't come here for that anymore, because we don't have reefs anymore, we will no longer have the fish that support our fisheries and our fishermen, and the people that come here to fish will no longer have all those tourism dollars. Like you said, not just the dive shops, but the hotels and the restaurants. There's so many sort of ripple effects of what happens when you undercut an entire pillar of an economy. The most recent estimate that I've seen was that coral reefs provide $8 billion a year to Florida's economy. And it, could be even more than that. So we really just can't afford to lose it. It's livelihoods. And actually, one thing you didn't highlight yet was the coastal protection benefits of healthy coral reefs. So as you can see with these corals on the screen, they create this amazing three-dimensional structure, right? And that's actually incredibly effective for breaking wave energy. As a wave goes over that structurally complex coral reef, it gets smaller, that energy dissipates, and that protects the coastline behind it from flooding and erosion during storms. So we really rely on that here in Florida to help protect our coastal properties from hurricanes and things like that.
Yeah, there's lots of reasons why coral need to be healthy. I think also people may not understand that about 25% of the life in the oceans at some point during their lives depend upon coral reefs, whether it's nurturing stage at the beginning of their lives or some other stage, right? Can you explain more about the dependence upon the larger overall ecosystem of the oceans and coral reefs?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, our statistic is that at least a quarter of all marine life relies on a coral reef at some point in its life, which means if we don't have healthy coral reefs, we risk losing all of those marine species. And this includes things that, humans rely on for food and for our livelihoods, things like conch and lobster and snapper and grouper, that we eat, that we fish, that we sell. All of those rely on coral reefs at some point during their lives, and we might risk losing them if we don't have coral reefs. Basically, they form just this amazing habitat for so many other marine creatures to rely on. And they're just really, really disproportionately biodiverse. We like to call them kind of the rainforests of the sea, these coral reefs. So we just can't afford to lose these incredibly diverse ecosystems.
You love what you do, obviously. I think anyone who does the kind of work that you do really loves it. It must be an emotional roller coaster ride.
Yeah, this summer has affected me more than I could have anticipated. Absolutely. I've cried underwater. A lot of my colleagues have cried underwater and above water to each other.
You can't
afterwards.
see tears under the water.
No, you can't. They're hidden by the mask. Yeah. It's very strange. Definitely very strange. You try to stay, professional, of course, and you try to remain optimistic in order to, try to just be as constructive as possible. But you certainly have days of just being really, really sad that a lot of these magnificent creatures, these pillars of the ecosystem, have been gone.
So look, we can only do so much to restore coral. I asked you a question, which was, can your restoration work outpace climate change? Can it be done? Is it possible? And if not, what is the ultimate solution?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, so, I like to remain optimistic that we have lots of different tools at our disposal, like I was mentioning, some of that genetic work, that selective breeding, manipulating coral microbiomes, things like that. They're really, really promising, but they really need to be scaled up if they have a chance of being able to meet this moment and, save coral reefs on a larger scale. But the point I want to underscore is that even our best intervention strategies as they exist today are really just buying time for coral reefs. If we do not address the root cause of these declines, which is global climate change, if we do not curb carbon emissions, and reduce or even reverse the rate of ocean warming, corals just don't stand a chance. There's only so much that we can do to kind of artificially push them to survive in these environments that are just completely becoming inhospitable to life.
Is it true that science estimates that by 2050 or so, we will have lost somewhere in the 95 to 99% range, or over 90% of the tropical coral reefs on the planet, most likely, unless we
that
are
is
able
true
to...
if we stay on our current track of carbon emissions. If we reduce that, especially if we reduce that drastically, I think there's a better trajectory. But if we don't address climate change, if we don't curb emissions, we're on track to probably lose the vast majority of our coral reefs. And we've already lost over half around the world.
Yeah, I think, this has got to touch people personally. I still don't quite understand why people deny the reality of what's happening. It's so hard to fathom. I think people think they're being lied to, that they think that we would make this up, that if they really feel that way, they should go dive the reefs. And hopefully they have seen pictures of the reefs back in the 1980s or 90s or even before that, and they understand the difference between what it used to be and what it is now. But this is a real world A to B impact of climate change on something that we really value, especially here in the state of Florida. It is so unique to have this resource. Nobody else has this in the United States except for Hawaii, obviously. Right. And it's one of the reasons why people flock to this state. I don't know about you, but I still don't get the pushback against the truth, against
I certainly
science,
don't.
and against just simply trying to make a healthy Earth. That's all that scientists are trying to do. I mean, it's not like you're not driving a Maserati, are you?
Trust me, if we were in it for the money, we wouldn't be doing this at all. That is not what you get into marine biology or ecosystem restoration for.
Yeah. But I think there's that feeling out there that there's some alternative agenda. I imagine, well, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. What is your agenda?
My agenda is to make sure that my children one day, which I don't have yet, but I want to, are able to see these magnificent ecosystems that I adore and have fallen in love with. And even more, I'd like to see them in a better state than what I even saw them in. I've only been diving for the last 7 or 8 years. I'm relatively early in my career. And so I kind of inherited these systems in an already weakened state compared to what they were back in the 70s and 60s. And, people that I admire that were able to see these reefs in a better state. So my agenda is to just, hopefully maintain what we already have so that future generations can benefit from it as well, and hopefully restore it to a previous state so that, these beautiful ecosystems aren't lost and are actually, restored for future generations.
You make a good point about children. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I am concerned about her future. And when I think about it, life is going to be tougher on her in the future. It's not only climate change, right? There's a lot of problems in the world. But this is
a big one, though.
This is a big and systemic one, and it affects everyone. And I think people underestimate and don't quite understand the connection between this and the quality of their life in the future. We are burdening our children with a massive weight on their shoulders, massive.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I wouldn't put the burden on you. I would put the burden more so on me and on especially my father and his generation, not my dad, but not personally my dad,
yeah.
but that particular generation. And there's not much we can do until we have enough people who understand the magnitude of the problem that we're going to deal with. But we are truly imperiling our children. And I do mean our children. I don't mean our children's children or their children's children. I mean literally our children, not the ones that are just 2 years old right now, not the ones that are 12, but even the ones that are 22. They are going to have a very hard life in the future. And one of the reasons is going to be because of human-caused climate change. So what would you like to see? And I know I've expanded the conversation beyond coral reefs, but this is one of the most, like I said, direct consequences. And I would say the most immediate consequences of human-caused climate change that people can actually see with their own 2 eyes. So what is your kind of synopsis on this?
To me, I worry that it's a slippery slope. The coral reefs are sort of the canary in the coal mine. If we let these ecosystems, which are already so important to us economically, culturally, ecologically, slip, and we don't take drastic action to try to save them, then what's next? These are really important and we do rely on them. And if we're not going to take urgent action for something this important, then what will we address? And coral reefs will fall, the next ecosystem, the next resource. You were talking about just general impacts of climate change on future generations. Whole areas of the world will become inhospitable. Florida is going to be one of the first casualties of sea level rise sometime in the next few decades. And, so there's just so many problems. And if we are unable to address the ones that we're seeing today, then how are we going to set up future generations? So I sort of see this as an important test. And even if we fail it, hopefully we can learn something from it and try to save the next, ecosystem or place, that's threatened. But we really have to wake up. This is not a future problem. Climate change is happening now. It's happening every day, whether it's the extreme marine heat waves killing our coral reefs here in Florida, or, fires in Maui, or wildfires in Canada, or droughts happening. It's every day. Flooding in New York City. Come on, this summer has just been, if you don't think all of these extreme events are happening and are problematic and are abnormal and extreme and scary, then you're delusional. You got to wake up. Yeah. That's all I have to say.
Well, and scientists are running out of terms to describe it. I don't know if you've been following all the scientific agencies, not NASA yet, not NOAA yet, but the Europeans have done their synopsis on September's climate. We have the Japanese data. We have the data from other agencies, and we'll have the U.S. data within the next few days or so. But basically, scientists are saying that they are running out of words. And I really do mean that, because if you look on the headline at the bottom of the screen of the BBC today, while I was watching it, it basically describes September's heat as gobsmacking, which was one particular scientist who said that, and another one who just went through a bunch of vocabulary words that describe just how crazy the heat was in September compared to anything we've seen before. And my concern is that people will see that and maybe they'll take note of it. But what happens next month or the month after when it's hotter? You've lost people's attention. So my only thought is, like so many things in the world, you almost have to hit rock bottom before people are like, oh yeah, I think it's time to do something about this. And by then it's actually going to be probably too late.
I worry that that's what it might take in certain ways. I mean, I think many people that are still able to deny climate change, that it's a, very urgent thing that we need to take action on, probably won't change their mind until, they're the one caught in that fire that's caused by climate change, or they're the one caught in that flood that's caused
I'm not
by
even
climate
sure.
change.
I'm not even sure that would do it, because it's very easy to convince yourself once you've bought into a concept that whatever's happening to you is not due to what you think it's not due to. You know what I mean? It's very. What do they call that? There's a special. I can't off the top of my head. I can't come up with it right now. But basically, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is easy to come by, and we see that in a lot of aspects of our society, but especially when it comes to climate change. I'm not sure that the folks who deny climate change and are really dug in are ever going to be able to kind of dig themselves out of there. But what's important is that we are educating the youth of this generation to understand that the challenges that they face, and also helping them, because it's not fair that they be laced with this burden and that we're not working on it as hard as we can.
Agreed. Yeah, I feel a lot of hope with new generations. I hear absolutely no denial usually when I talk to anyone below a certain age. And in fact, a lot of activism and a lot of just willingness to get down and do whatever it is that they need to do to try to make a difference, in their lives and their communities in whatever ways they can. So I have a ton of hope with the new generation. And I think we just need to do our best to, stay positive, put out as much factual information as we possibly can, get those people that are, persuadable. I don't even want to say persuade, because it shouldn't be persuasion, but, get everybody on our same team that is willing to listen and to learn, and that's what we can do. To me, if you ask me the number one thing that you can do to take action and help our coral reefs today is actually to share your knowledge with other people, about what's going on, and to vote accordingly. Those are kind of my biggest recommendations for non-scientists. What you can do today and every day and every year is, make choices for people who prioritize climate action, who prioritize our Earth, because there's only one of them, and our children and our children's children need it too.
It's time to be brave. If you're going to be brave on anything, now's the time to be brave. The point is this is a big problem, and that if you have feelings on it, we need as many people working on it as possible if we're going to avert what is a very difficult future. I'm not a doomer. I'm not the kind of person that says that we're all going to die. I don't necessarily believe that. But I do believe that life will become increasingly a lot more difficult, and our quality of life will begin to disappear quickly if we don't take matters into our own hands. And so what you're saying is we need people to talk about it. People don't want to talk about it. People do not.
Spread the word.
They're afraid to talk about it. That's where
we can't be,
at.
because it's happening.
I know.
If there's anyone, say, in your family or in your social circle that could benefit from just hearing your perspective on it, perhaps somebody on the news like me, you don't want to listen to some talking head, but if somebody in your community, talks to you, you might be more likely to listen to them. So I think, everyone who is concerned has a lot of agency and a lot of power to try to, just within their own families, their own social circles, their own communities, try to spread the word and, share factual information and fight disinformation and try to just inspire action.
Well, listen, is there anything else you want to say before we close the show out?
I think we covered quite a bit. Again, if we're getting back to the coral reef question, just because that's what I'm here for primarily, the number one thing that we can do to help our coral reefs and help our ocean ecosystems is address climate change. So I urge everyone who cares about these resources and making sure that we have them going into the future to really demand climate action from our elected officials, from people in power, and from each other.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, this was a very informative interview. I want to thank you, Dr. Liv Williamson from University of Miami Rosenstiel School. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
And everyone, I also want to mention that, first of all, you can listen to or watch the show on various media. So first of all, on the WFLA.com website, on our Facebook page where you may be watching it right now. Also, this show will eventually be packaged up and put on YouTube as well, so you can watch it on YouTube. In addition, this becomes a podcast on Spotify and also Apple Podcasts. And I want to call your attention to this graphic right here, which is this is actually, I should have changed this, but you will find on our website that there is a link to the story that I did with Liv, the Q&A interview, which is a lot more information as well. So make sure you check out our website. It's live right now. It's on the top of the website. There's a lot of great information. So if you didn't catch all of this and you want to catch more of this, just go to WFLA.com. Again, thank you very much for joining me. Have a great day and a great weekend. We have a cool front coming here in Florida, so we'll look forward to that. Thank you very much. I'll see you again next week.
Watch or listen to Jeff's Climate Classroom, powered by ArmorView Window and Door on WFLA social media platforms, and find Jeff's climate reports on WFLA.com.